Greetings, everyone. This is Canadian Meets the South, episode 13, I believe. Today I'm reviewing the book Edge of the Precipice by uh, Robert V. Remini. I was blanking on his name for a bit. But this book details the Compromise of 1850 and some of the events that led up to it. And I guess you can say the main guy is Henry Clay, and it really talks about some of the some things that he accomplished, such as the Compromise Tariff of 1833, which was towards the end of the nullification crisis, and the Compromise of 1820, which was which dealt with Missouri's entry into the Union. It really contrasted the views of Calhoun, who was a Southern states' rights nullifier, and Henry Clay. Now, initially, Calhoun and Clay were, you could say, voted for the same thing. They were both war hawks during the War of 1812, and Calhoun supported Henry Clay's American system back in 1816. He supported the high tariff, the internal improvements, and the Second Bank of the United States. Those two were signed. The high tariff of 1816 and the Second Bank of the United States were signed by James Madison, but he vetoed the bonus bill the day before he left office. And what I find interesting is, well, this isn't really covered in the book, but Calhoun wanted to override Madison's veto on the bonus bill, but later he does condemn the American system of Henry Clay, which is really what the arch federalist Alexander Hamilton supported. Henry Clay, you could say, was a Southerner, and Remini really talks about how he was against the expansion of slavery. This like his eyes, I guess, on the prize of the American system was to ally himself with the Northerners who also wanted this American system, and the slave issue was a wedge issue. Like, the North wanted to agitate on slavery to separate the West from the South, so that the West wouldn't join the Southern voting bloc, like the Western territories, which would become states, wouldn't join the Southern voting bloc in Congress. What else can I say? So when it came to the 1820, Henry Clay did broker that compromise. The Missouri was applying for statehood, and it was going to be a slave state. So to balance it out, I guess, Maine, which was originally a part of Massachusetts, also joined the Union as a free state. But what I found interesting was during that time, the Missouri wanted to discriminate against free blacks entering the state, and Henry Clay told them that they couldn't do that. And I found that's actually interesting because several years later, free blacks were banned from several states, including Illinois. Um, John Logan, who later became he was in the Illinois legislature and later became a Union general, and then after that, the vice presidential candidate in 1884 for the Republican Party. He was a vicious white supremacist, and he helped push for the legislation to ban blacks from entering Illinois. Of course, this is after Henry Clay died. John Logan pushed for this in 1853, and John Logan has a memorial to him, and you know how he. I'm recording this June 1. Yesterday was Memorial Day, or should I say the day before? We don't celebrate that in Canada. I'm sorry, but I found it interesting that the Northerners were Clay, and as well as the Northerners were not happy with Missouri restricting the entry of free blacks into their state. But later on, several years later, they would do the same thing. I saw the hypocrisy in that. But moving on, Remini covers the Tariff of Abominations, and he says that the Compromise Tariff. Well, he explained the Compromise Tariff this way: it was to give time for I'm blanking out here, but it was originally supposed to be 7 years, but then I think it was extended to 9 or 10 years. And one side wanted time, and the other wanted, as in the South wanted time, I believe, time to build up their economy, while the North wanted some protection, of course. And this was a compromise that Clay and Calhoun had to work out. And Clay, I don't remember in this book, but in John C. Calhoun, American Portrait by Margaret L. Mead, Clay said that Calhoun owed the continuance of his career to Clay because of that compromise. But with those two compromises in mind, and I'm sure maybe there were some other ones, but those were the big ones: the Missouri Compromise of 1820 and the compromise and the Tariff of 1833. The Remini was saying that afterwards they shifted less towards economics, which I don't believe is true. Remini is saying that, but there were still tariff battles after that. There was the Tariff of 1842, the Black Tariff of 1842, unfortunately signed by John Tyler, and then the Walker Tariff of 1846, signed by Polk, and then the Tariff of 1857, which was the Black Tariff raised the tariff. The Walker Tariff reduced it, and then the Tariff of 1857, signed by Franklin Pierce, lowered it to its lowest point ever. And then, of course, Buchanan in 1861 signs the Morrill Tariff, which more than doubles the tariff. But those last two tariffs, the Tariff of 1857 and the Morrill Tariff, come after the Compromise of 1850. So certainly the tariff war was still ongoing after the Tariff of 1833, the Compromise Tariff of 1833. But moving on to the main part of the story of Edge of the Precipice, you have The issue is California entering the Union, and then a bunch of other issues combined with it. And Henry Clay was the one who was making it, who wanted a compromise. And what I found interesting is I guess the main bad guy here, like portrayed in this book by Remini, was President Zachary Taylor. Uh, the people in his administration thought that Henry Clay was jealous of Taylor because Taylor had won the Whig nomination and ultimately the presidency, while Clay had failed to do that, to win the presidency. And Clay was trying to save the Union. Now, what's interesting about Taylor was that many Southern Democrats voted for him. Not his son-in-law, um, is it Jefferson Davis, well, his former son-in-law, but his because his son-in-law was a Democrat and his advisors were Whigs. That's why Davis did not want to support his former father-in-law, even though he loved him. But Davis, although they were very cordial with each other, and they were invited to White House dinners back when Zachary Taylor was still alive. But Zachary Taylor is like considered, like, I guess, somewhat of a villain in this book because he wasn't really in favor of any compromise. He just wanted California to join, and if Texas had threatened secession, if would secede, he would send the troops, and unfortunately, that's how it seemed to be. Even though Zachary Taylor wasn't really ideological, he also cared about the Union, but he wasn't interested in compromise. He wasn't interested in caring for the sectionalist fights between the North and South. And some of the Southerners who supported him started thinking that maybe it wasn't such a good idea to support him. And the Nashville Convention was called by Mississippi, like in 1849, and it actually happened in 1850. And it was called for by Mississippi during Zachary Taylor's presidency. So it was clear that he wasn't going to favor one section over the other. He just wanted California to be in the Union, to join the Union, and he didn't want any other compromise measures in it. And that being said, he did tell Polk that maybe if California and Oregon left the Union, that would be okay. But he surely would not have let Texas out of the Union. Well, most likely. Not after all the fighting he had done for Texas, partly because of Texas and the Mexican-American War. But he opposed parts of the compromise. At first, it was going to be an omnibus bill, which included several things, such as settling the border between New Mexico and Texas, getting a hold of Texas's debt back when it was a separate republic, allowing Utah, which was run by Mormons. I forgot what it was called back then, but allow that as a territory, and New Mexico, of course, and the fugitive slave, a stronger fugitive slave law, and the omnibus was unraveled afterwards, and it was joked that I forgot how it was unraveled, how it fell apart, but at the end, only the the Utah bill was left in the compromise. But the saving grace of the compromise was according to Remini, the Zachary Taylor dying, so that Millard Fillmore would come and replace him. Now, it talked a little bit about Henry Foote and Thomas Hart Benton, how there was tension between them, and how Calhoun had died. Thomas Hart Benton, well, this is not in the book, but Thomas Hart Benton really didn't like Calhoun. Benton was also like okay with restricting slavery in the territories, even though he was a slaveholder himself. He was a Unionist, but loyal to Jackson. Meanwhile, Calhoun was once Jackson's vice president, and then he became bitter enemies with Jackson. Then there was with Foote. There was the relationship with Foote. Foote, like this is not in the book, but I read on a website. Foote had asked Calhoun after Calhoun had said only the North can save the Union, and there cannot be any compromise. Because and Foote had said, "Why didn't you tell me any of this?" And then Calhoun said something along the lines of, "Do you think you're special? I didn't tell anyone in advance of this." Foote was a Southern Whig and also supposedly a moderate. If he's a Southern Whig, he wouldn't have been too strong on states' rights. But at that time, right, and he favored, early in his career, he had favored central bank and the high tariff, just like Henry Clay, and he had supported Zachary Taylor in 1848. But Foote and Benton were almost got into a really bad argument, and Foote pulled out his pistol, and Benton said, "Shoot me," basically. Like he said he showed his chest, but there was no bloodshed, but it was really bad, and these were both supposedly moderate Southerners, but they disagreed on the compromise because Benton had said that California should be admitted into the Union without any compromise, or at least first without a compromise, and Foote didn't agree with that, and believed that if California comes in, then there will be no compromise afterwards. And he had mocked Benton for being in love with his son-in-law, who was from California, John C. Fremont, who would later be the 1856 GOP nominee, and then afterwards a Union general. Let's get back to Clay. So, although he was the chief guy responsible for the omnibus, it died. The omnibus became unraveled, and then afterwards, who came to the rescue? Stephen Douglas from Illinois, and he split up the compromise into, I think, 6 or 5 bills, and each senator could vote for however he wanted for a particular bill, and then they all somehow magically passed. But only four senators, including Sam Houston from Texas, actually voted for all 5 of them, and then all 6 of them, and then 5 of them were voted by another 7, and including Douglas. But Douglas wasn't present for, I think, the fugitive slave one. And Jefferson Davis, you could say, was labeled as an ultra states' rights guy, even though he was ultra, but he was friends with Calhoun, but he was not a nullifier. So he was not, like, you could say, the fire-eating nullifier that someone like Thomas Barnwell Rhett would be, from South Carolina, or James Henry Hammond, or some other. Most of them, like, when you think fire eater, you think of Calhoun, and then his followers from South Carolina. But there were some other fire eaters from outside California. And then on the other side of the spectrum was William Seward, and he gave, in 1850, he gave the higher law speech, in which he said that there is a higher law. The God was more important than the Constitution, essentially. And people did not like that he was bringing religion into this political discussion. And he was on the other side, the ultra-sectionalist for the North. He, as a Northern Whig, like but it became clear after the Compromise that the Northern and the Southern Whigs were eventually gonna split, but it only happened after Clay and Webster were dead in 1852. Like, they would split in 1854 because of the Kansas-Nebraska bill. Now, before I get to that, I also want to recall in 1848, after the election, this was the first time in which only a plurality had voted for the speaker, Howard Cobb. He was a Democrat, I believe, and it was partly because the Whigs, the Southern Whigs, refused to vote for a Northern Whig who, unless the Northern Whig would condemn the Wilmot Proviso. And if you don't know this, the Wilmot Proviso kept passing the House year after year, but it kept dying in the Senate. The Wilmot Proviso by David Wilmot, Pennsylvania Democrat and later Republican, free soiler and then Republican, like a free soil Democrat. I'm not sure if he actually officially joined, but he was like free soil in ideology, and a big racist too. Big white supremacist. He said that all the territory claimed from Mexico would be free. Like, that was basically what the Wilmot Proviso said, and this was obviously for sectionalism, because the free states wanted more power, while in the Congress, while as, and I guess also in the Electoral College, while as the South wanted their property rights respected, so that Southerners with slave property could go into the South. And then obviously this is it's not just property rights, it's power, political and economic power, because whoever the Western states, the territories which would become states, would side with in the voting bloc would help shape the economics of the country, namely the American system. And you could see already the fracturing of the Whigs, how the Southern Whigs refused to support a Northern Whig who wouldn't condemn the Wilmot Proviso. Now, in 1854, of course, when Clay is dead, Alexander H. Stephens claims credit for the passage of the Kansas-Nebraska House in the House of Representatives, while Douglas was in the Senate. And I guess maybe it ended up not going so well. I mean, I think by this time, Stevens was a Democrat, because he was originally a Whig, just like his friend Robert Toombs. And I think I've mentioned this before. Stevens and Toombs were friends, but they were on opposite sides of the Georgia Secession Convention. Stevens voted against secession, while Toombs voted for secession. But ideologically, they were the same. They were both Unionists, and not necessarily the strongest on states' rights, being Whigs. But they were against agitation of the slavery issue, which I guess is different from Thomas Hart Benton's agitation on the view on the slavery issue. He was fine with it being restricted. Honestly, same thing kind of with Zachary Taylor. He was not. He may have been a Southern slave owner, but he didn't want to benefit his section over the North. And of course, like eventually, Remini says that Douglas, Pierce, Buchanan, and Fillmore were not strong enough to keep the country together after the Compromise of 1850, but it gave, like, after the Compromise of 1850, it gave the North enough time to find a good leader for the Union, and that was Abraham Lincoln or something. Like, I don't know, Remini is certainly a consolidationist. Like, that's where his heart seemed to lie in this book. A Unionist, not too much a states' rights guy, even though he does cite how Calhoun believed that the United States was a confederacy of sovereign and independent states, free sovereign and independent states. But let's talk about current events. So in Canada, I guess. So, Candace Malcolm, she had a YouTube video. Like, she's from True North. Like, this is one of those non-mainstream media platforms, news platforms. They're, conservative leaning. She's the leader, I guess, the founder. And she talked about how it was useless to have this French debate because it's pandering to Quebec, because Quebec doesn't have the same values as the rest of Canada, and especially the Conservative Party. They voted for Mulroney because he was a Quebecer, but they didn't vote for Charest because even though Charest was a Quebecer, so was Michel de Sepp from the Bloc Québécois, and so was Prime Minister Jean Chrétien. And they didn't vote for Harper, they didn't vote for Clark back when Clark was Prime Minister, like 79 and 80, and then also in 2000 when he was the leader of the PCs who were dying before the merger. But that's not where, like, the values are for the people of Quebec, and I'm glad that she recognized that. And when she was talking about the French debate, and when it came to, like, the bill in Quebec about banning religious symbols for public servants, which is not really controversial, and it's supported by the majority of Quebecers. All of the candidates, including Jean Charest apparently, were against that bill. And I remember Scotch Acheson, he said, like, to Alexa Lavoie from The Rebel that he was against it because of minority rights, but using heavy-handedness from the central government is not minority rights. This is not going to help. This reminds me of the left during the 50s and the 60s want to clamp down on civil rights because of, like, the minorities, the blacks in those segregationist states. But you're forgetting that if you use heavy-handedness from the center, heavy-handedness from the center is going to come back and bite you. And then when your enemies take control of the center, so the solution to minority rights is to decentralize and then move with your feet. Not that you can move out of Canada if you're uh, unjabbed. Like recently, like yesterday, the Liberals, NDP, and the Bloc voted against the Conservative motion to lift the travel restrictions on the unvaccinated. So there's you can't really move out with your feet. And then of course Trudeau issues a handgun ban. He like prohibits the buying, the selling, and like exchanging of handguns. And I don't remember the exact. I didn't read the exact bill, but he said that he's not targeting law-abiding gun owners, which is a bunch of nonsense. And then the Americans I saw on social media were saying, "Wow, that cannot be us. We cannot allow this to happen to us." And I know there was a shooting recently in Texas in Uvalde, or I don't know how to pronounce that name, some town in Texas or city. And of course, after that, people are advocating for more gun control, like Beto O'Rourke. Ah, man, it's crazy. Certainly my values are in line with the South or even the red Midwest of the United States. Um, but I'm not gonna move there. I can't move there, not with Joe Biden being president and him blocking unvaccinated people from entering. And it's so funny. Unvaccinated people, Ukrainians can't enter Canada or can't take a plane to Canada, but or have more freedom to move than vaccinated Canadians. It's so crazy. Um, and I remember there's also the UCP leadership race to talk about. So the two confirmed people in it were the current MLA Brian Jean and former MLA Danielle Smith, both of whom are former Wild Rose leaders of the opposition. People don't trust Danielle Smith because she made the mistake of joining the PCs at the time and like crossing the floor and really damaged both parties and allowed. But it wasn't clear that Rachel Notley's MDP would consolidate the left because sometimes the the Alberta Liberals were still like a force on the left in Alberta, and now they're gone. Now Rachel Notley has a complete grasp on the left in Canada, in Alberta, and people think that if you don't get a good leader in Alberta, and that the Wild Rose Independence Party is going to split the vote, particularly, and it's going to hurt in Calgary because Rachel Notley has Edmonton locked up. There's only one MLA in Edmonton who's a conservative, and that's Casey Madu. But Calgary is where the power is, where the balance of power is, because the rural areas on their own even may be strongly conservative, but they're not gonna form a majority, not without at least Calgary. Edmonton plus Calgary is just like enough power because there's so many people in Edmonton and Calgary. That's why Edmonton plus Calgary has the majority of the seats. And Edmonton's not a place for the Conservatives anymore. So you have Calgary left, and if they don't pick a good leader, like a leader who is going to appeal to the people in Calgary, then this is they won't lose too many votes from the Wild Rose Independence Party of Alberta. Then they should be able to hang on to power as long as not too many votes in Calgary split off. But at least that's how I see it. Or it may be more complicated than that. There are some other like urban municipalities in Calgary that may also be in danger of vote splitting from the Wild Rose Independence Party. But who knows? Like, I know Kian Bexty from the Counter Signal, formerly from the Rebel. He said that he would buy a UCP membership if they got a separatist, and then also would campaign on gun rights. I mean, I don't think gun rights are particularly special. They're just property, right? Just like everything else. But it's just that the gun is very important and very powerful property, you could say. Um, as Mao Zedong, said, who was the chairman of the Communist Party of China a long time ago, the political power comes from the barrel of the gun. And then let's talk about last thing I guess we can talk about is the election. The Ontario election is tomorrow, and I'm hoping New Blue gets a lot of votes. The people think that Doug Ford has the election locked up, and it's because the left is split between the NDP and the Liberals. This must be some sick world in which cons can only win because the two major left-wing parties have split up, and then there's another split with the Green Party, or a smaller like split. So like this is some really messed up stuff. But Doug Ford has really, he locked down, and then he promised not to introduce vaccine passports, saying it would create a split society, but he did it anyways. And his famous phrase was Ontario is open for business after he got into power, but he didn't. No, but he locked down really hard. And then there's, of course, CRT, critical race theory, and and as well as gender ideology still in the classrooms. Like this gender ideology was back from the McGuinty Wynne era, but CRT was passed recently and was voted for by Rick Nichols. And Rick Nichols supposedly is a social conservative, but he also voted for, in October 2017, he voted for the abortion bubble zones. And of course, don't tell Derek, if you tell Derek Sloan that, the leader of the Ontario Party, he's not going to like that. But it's a shame that Derek is doing that. Because he doesn't, like, he knows that Jim and Belinda have been working on the New Blue for a long time, but for over a year and a half. But that's still, about a year and a half. But he's still, like, at the beginning of 2022, he decides to lead another party, and then Jim joked he might run for UCP leadership after this because he was in Alberta. When things don't go the way he wants in the Ontario Party. I know that Roger Stone supports the Ontario Party. I'm not sure why. Like, if Roger Stone actually knew about how New Blue was actually spent a lot of time, and people spent a lot of resources and stuff to get then to become like the new right, then in Ontario, then maybe Roger Stone would have thought differently. But Derek Sloan's unstable, and who knows what he's going to do afterwards. But there you have it. I'm hoping that that Alberta will choose a strong premier, like leader of the Conservative Party, and later a stronger check on Justin Trudeau, because after all, they did vote. Like there was a referendum on equalization to remove equalization, so there needs to be something that they need to do. Like equalizations when basically the rich provinces send tax money to the poor provinces. Essentially, that's equalization, and it's unfortunate it's in our constitution, but it needs to change. Like if not completely destroyed, at least the formula needs to be less generous, so that the eastern provinces, which are poor, and then like the Atlantic and Quebec, hopefully they have more incentive to develop their own resources. Like should the formula be changed? But anyways, thanks for listening. I hope that things will be better later this year in the future, but we'll see. We'll see after this election. We'll see after the UCP election. But thank you for watching, everyone. This has been Canadian Meets the South.